Well, hello, I'm Bernard Hickey from Newsroom, and occasionally we talk to the authors of the think pieces, the big strategic ideas that sometimes pop up in Newsroom, and one that came out about a week ago from Drury, the entrepreneur investor who, like many people in New Zealand, is now one place, Havelock North. Rod, welcome into Newsroom. Great to see you on Zoom here. We've all discovered how to use Zoom. It's great. Tell us what you were thinking about when you put together this article, which is published on Newsroom.
Yeah, well, thanks, Bernard, and thanks so much for the great work that you guys have been doing. It's been a fantastic platform. So, for the last 2 years since I stopped working, I've really been thinking about what are the important projects that can drive New Zealand forward. And, what I've learned over that 2 years, it does take you sort of expect it's going to take 5 to 10 years for things to happen. And in the old mantra, I've never wasted a good crisis, it's been, quite a lot of their sorts now. I thought it was important to verbalize them. And I'm not saying I'm right on all of these ideas, but I think there's some really good things that we can talk about, and we need to make a decision quite quickly on. So I think the really interesting framework that's sort of come out from this is the work that Roger Dennis has done. So what are those sort of wave one projects that we need to save people's lives? And it's been amazing watching the Sam Morgans, the Stephen Tyndalls, the Nick Mowbrays, the Rob Fifes really get organised and the industry work together for those projects. And then thinking about what are the important sort of wave two projects, what are the shovel-ready projects, the ones that we can get the country started. And then thinking about using that we're actually having a very reflective time. And if we are going to put stimulus money into the system, what are the things that will create the best long-term benefit, which are those wave three projects?
And so the wave three projects, you've come up with some ideas here which have really sparked a debate. What is your thinking behind those ideas? What are the key ones?
Well, probably it's probably worth just coming back to the wave two ones, because those are the ones that are really urgent about right now. So there's been a good discussion, and what's been fascinating, having just sort of thrown this open, we're seeing a lot of people just commenting, saying, that is common sense. And I hope what's happening is that the politicians are watching the discussion which is taking place, because no one expects the politicians to drive strategy. What we do expect them to do is to see good ideas, and if they can see that people are engaging positively with those good ideas, then I think they can be more confident about sort of getting behind those ones, and more confidence asking for help. So there's a few ones that I think that are really key right now. One is 5G. We've done a great job with UFB, as we're experiencing, with some of the best sort of domestic broadband in any part of the world, because we got the market right under our UFB program, where we put infrastructure investment and getting fibre to the home, and then opened up the market so that retail internet service providers could provide that over the top. And then sort of seems obvious to ask the question, well, if that's worked so well here, why wouldn't we do the same for 5G? We're a long, skinny country. Do we need 2 or 3 different networks? And if we say, actually, rather than just require Spark and Vodafone, those sort of companies, to build out their own networks, why wouldn't we think of that as sort of critical nation-building infrastructure? Go and talk to the New Zealand Super Fund, the Australian Super Funds, and say, hey, look, why don't we roll this out on an infrastructure basis, because they're looking for big projects they can deploy capital to and get sort of 4.5% return, and then use that to build out the network, and then have all sorts of people like Vodafone, Spark, even now in Hawke's Bay, provide those mobile services over the top. And if we get sort of super profits running out of that infrastructure, maybe it's $5 per connection per month to pay for the infrastructure layer, but then we can roll it out further and further and further. So I think that's a good one, and these aren't sort of new ideas. The industry's talked to Chris Farfoy about them. So what I've been doing is, putting pressure back on those ministers, saying, well, we've done the work. You've talked about this. Can we now have a accelerated discussion for those projects? The other obvious one that's in Chris Farfoy's portfolio is PayWave. The last 4 commerce ministers for probably 8 to 12 years I've dealt with about this issue of the difference between the domestic credit network and the great domestic debit network that we used to have. And now we've got this consumer reaction where no one wants to touch terminals. So now surely this is the time to reclaim our mantra of having one of the best payments networks. And you guys have written some great articles. Again, you know, Chris has had all the papers. We've looked at it a few times. So that's one we could make a quick decision on and spark off some work. But I think the really interesting one is around the Overseas Investment Office and that policy of not selling land to foreigners. And I love this one because it's a really interesting one that tests our values. So we obviously have values in New Zealand about the environment, and we also have values about equality. So at the time when the Auckland housing market was super hot, you know, it's quite an easy thing to say, well, let's just block foreign sales. And seeing a lot of the comments there, a lot of people have this allergic reaction to people from overseas buying land. But my experience hasn't been that. The experience I've had, and we've got a lot of Silicon Valley people who are based in the Hawke's Bay who have been here for 4 or 5 years, they are just fantastic citizens. They don't consume much road. They don't consume any education. They're not using health. They're here for under 6 months because they don't want to be taxed on the worldwide income. They create a bunch of jobs around what they're doing, but they're really nice people that are incredibly respectful, want to engage and connect us back to their networks. So the idea I had, and this is talking to Jim Bolt, the Mayor of Queenstown, and a lot of people in Queenstown are very energized about this at the moment. If tourism absolutely stops, then construction, which is a lot of based on tourism, that just falls over straight away. So I think you know, a really good thing to ask and have a national discussion about is how do we feel about, you know, maybe opening up 1,000 new sections, maybe some in Queenstown and the lakes area down there, maybe some more in the Tukituki Valley, maybe up in that golf course up in Northland, picking a few areas and saying, hey, look, we're going to open up 1,000 sections. If you want to commit to doing a 5 to 10 million plus construction project, where you can't come down and visit just yet, but most of the people have already been here. They know what it's like. They can have a look on video. Then we can get the architects going, get construction projects going. And I think, you know, that it's a really interesting thing to test. So I actually spoke to David Parker about it yesterday, and he is religiously opposed to that idea. And as I was having a great discussion with him, I just said, look, it's something to test. You know, I think it's something that we should just ask the question. Maybe you're right. Maybe people don't really want this, but I think it's one of those questions we should absolutely ask.
And I wonder too, if without the pressure of quite strong population growth, because we're not going to have the same population growth, at least over the next couple of years, and with intense investment in infrastructure, there might not be quite the same political reaction against foreign investment. If you start to see house prices falling and some of the motorways opening up and some of the stresses on infrastructure reduced because the government rightly is investing heavily in them.
I also think it's really interesting that I don't think we've really processed what it means like if we have 20% unemployment or 30% unemployment. I mean, things get pretty scary, and I'm looking at a lot of our customers and what's happening in the States at the moment. So you know, the US is a very vast place where there's lots of people. And the US government's put out their PPP, the payroll protection program. And firstly, you can't physically get on the phone to talk to somebody because there just isn't enough. There's so many people wanting demand that you actually can't get on. You can't get onto their website because a lot of them are old COBOL technologies. That stuff's falling over. It's never designed for the scale. So imagine being sitting in quarantine in the US and you don't get paid. You got your kids there, and you actually can't get money. And we know that we're only ever 2 meals away from anarchy, right? So like things could get really ugly in the next sort of 3 to 4 weeks. So then you ask the question about, would we want to keep our construction industry going and find ways to keep that moving so that they invest and, you know, spend money with all the subbies and with the, you know, buying materials and all of those things. You know, I think we're going to see we could see some pretty scary things over the next few weeks in other parts of the world.
You also mentioned renewable energy. That's one of the things we've got going for us. We can feed ourselves and we can power ourselves. What's your thoughts on, you know, how we could invest or focus on that in the aftermath?
Yeah, so that's a really great one. I've been putting a lot of time in that one over the last almost 2 years. And what's interesting is that you find that the markets are quite rational and they work with all the incentives which are in place. And in a short term, there's not much broken. But when you look at the big picture, you think about what's our competitive advantage. What's our version of Saudi Arabian oil? Well, it's, to me, it's rainwater, which is free, and hills. And as I started looking about why are we 80% plus are renewable, and how do we get to 100% plus? The answer was just super interesting. And you start pulling the string on that. We only store about 2 or 3 weeks worth of water. So you have to have a whole lot of coal sitting up in Huntley, and we'll never get to 100% renewable. The answer is, you just ask the question, well, why don't you store, 2 or 3 years worth of water, a whole drought cycle? And that's one extreme idea. And I've been approached by a bunch of people around other sorts of, pumped hydro schemes, smaller schemes. But I think the question is, what would we have to do to reduce the price of electricity so it was a no-brainer for all industry like Fonterra and all of that with industrial heating to flip to renewable electricity? And that's quite a big price reduction. And people don't just want to go and argue about having a dam or not. I think what we've got to do is get excited about what the projects we could do with that, what New Zealand looks like. And I think that's thinking about things like flipping the vehicle fleet to electric cars faster, being the leaders in electric aviation, thinking about autonomous electric buses as part of the Auckland public transport solution. And when people start thinking about those projects and go, actually, we really want that, then again, you can have this mature discussion around, well, would you sacrifice a small amount of land to store some water? And if you had all that water, you might do more plant-based proteins and all those good, interesting things. So I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I think that's a great discussion to have. I think the piece that's missing now, which I'm kind of looking forward to over the next week, is what's the interface going to be between government and these ideas? And what I hope is that the government will appoint a person to lead those sort of projects. And then the next question you say is who? And I just listened to a great podcast that Leighton did with Stephen Joyce. And if there's a guy that's, has respect of everybody, and if Jacinda's played this pretty well, but to have someone like Stephen in there as a bit of a foil, picking up some of those projects and being able to filter out, some of the crazy ideas that I have and the reality that other people might have, he would be there'd be people like that who people respect, because we've got a job for the next 3 to 5 years to get New Zealand working again and position us for the future. So thinking about people like that would be fantastic, and I'd absolutely love to help.
Yeah, and your piece was, for me, quite surprisingly popular and well read. Essentially you're talking about some pretty meaty issues. Tell us about the reaction you've gotten to it in terms of commentary and people saying, hey, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's been super interesting. So I posted it on LinkedIn as well. I had 120,000 views, almost 2,000 reactions, and over 400 comments, and all really good debate. So I think New Zealanders are hungry for vision, and they want to see a picture of what they can do. So I think I hope that the politicians are watching what's going on and then have the confidence to engage, because we're on the same team. We all want to do the right thing. We want to have a good, respectful debate. Like, I enjoyed debating David Parker yesterday. It was so much fun. And I told him I'm going to put absolute pressure on him, but I would absolutely love to go and have dinner with him as well. And I think that's the spirit of people in New Zealand. Let's have these debates now so that we can move. Because if you are that construction company down in Queenstown, you don't have months, right? If you've got 50 staff, you've got to get revenue straight away. So I'm pushing pretty hard for some big reactions, but definitely there's, what we've demonstrated is that people are really hungry for that big vision and to get in and talk.
Yeah, because I've noticed over the last 3 or 4 weeks, a different tone in the way people are talking about solving problems. Whereas in the past, everything was quite incremental. You don't make big changes, you make little changes. Suddenly, it's as if people have got permission to talk about big ideas and doing things in a way they haven't before. And also the public can see an opportunity as much as a threat of remaking New Zealand in a way that's much more productive, and people are much healthier. And do you feel that sense out there as well? I've never seen it before in New Zealand.
Yeah, and it builds on a lot of frustration because we have, as you would expect, most Western democracies have a 3-year term, can only really do incremental things. And yet we're seeing our sort of big brothers in the West, Australia and the US, our values have diverged quite strongly. They do things that we just wouldn't even talk about doing here, right? And then we also see that the countries that we trade a lot with that aren't burdened by democracy, would be a nice way of saying it, are really acting as a team and working quite strong. So I think there's a real wake-up call here that we actually have to chart our own path here. And I think what's been really good is that Jacinda's in the few crises she's had, the major crises she's had to deal with in her time as Prime Minister, New Zealanders have been really proud of that leadership. And I think that aligns us now for actually being leaders in these things. So everything we have to do must be environmentally friendly. Equality is an absolute value. So we've got to do it for all New Zealanders, but we are this, even more so, this fantasy destination now that people want to be associated with. So let's exploit that.
Yeah, and we're unusual in many ways in that we're a democracy, but we can be reasonably unified and make big decisions. We don't have an upper house or a really calcified political system where people don't even talk to each other. And, we're small enough in a way where we can be quite nimble and make big calls, and we have in the past, actually.
Yeah, I think that's our thing. We are inherently kind. And so we can be kind, but we can also move quickly. And I think we'll always use our New Zealand values for making our decisions. But the thing is short-circuiting the process, which is why, we're talking to ministers now. They've already done the work. This isn't new thinking, but let's actually make a call on it. And if the call's no, fine, on to the next one. But I think, speed is the essence, and we really need to work fast because we are competing against everybody else.